House Emergency House, Deputy Fletcher.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
That is a House and County 911 call from March 31st after what police reports called a domestic dispute between Kenny Bibiloni and a woman in his home.
Are you holding her down?
No, I'm not hurting her.
I asked, were you holding her down?
I'm a police officer. I have her in handcuffs.
At the time, Kenny Bibiloni was a Centerville police officer, but that argument happened at his Perry home. That's important because a Centerville Police Internal Affairs investigation said Bibiloni was supposed to be on duty in Centerville that night. Instead, documents we obtained in an open records request say Bibiloni left his jurisdiction and headed for Perry without telling anyone. The argument escalated, and according to the investigation and 911 call recording, Bibiloni eventually put the woman in handcuffs.
Take these handcuffs off of me!
In that recording, Bibiloni says he did it to protect her from herself. He eventually requested Perry police come to the house. The police report says Perry officers later left the scene. No one was charged.
You good? You can close? Yeah. About to leave.
The Internal Affairs investigation found that by leaving Centerville, Bibiloni abandoned his job and duty assignment and lied to a supervisor. He was suspended without pay on April 9th and resigned 9 days later. It was not the first time he left a department in connection with an investigation. Rewind to the summer of 2017. Georgia's Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, also known as POST, is the group that accredits law enforcement officers and tracks them throughout their careers. Their records say Bibiloni resigned from the Warner Robins Police Department in lieu of termination on July 21, 2017. Warner Robins records allege he failed to show up for duty and was insubordinate. Less than a month later, Centerville PD hired him. Documents show he was part of a trend in the Centerville Police Department of hiring officers with a history of workplace discipline. Christopher Wilcox is currently a Centerville Police Corporal, but according to his personnel file, Wilcox left the Fort Valley Police Department in 2014.
This is an official IA investigation.
According to Post, a Fort Valley Internal Affairs investigation found that he wasn't completely truthful on an incident report and violated department policies during a traffic stop. The investigator recommended firing him. Post put his certification on probation for a year, but 2.5 years later, Centerville hired him. He earned the department's Medal of Valor for his actions in an April 2018 shootout. But 3 months later, he found himself the target of another internal affairs investigation after he tased a handcuffed man 3 times. Another officer's body camera captured it.
He suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder.
We all do. It's fine.
No, he's been in the Marines, and I'm talking...
The Centerville Internal Affairs report says the tased man was no threat to officers and that Wilcox violated department policy and overreacted. He got a written reprimand and still works for Centerville. The trend continues with a third officer. He used to work for the Warner Robins Police Department, but records show that department fired him in March of 2017 after he made his second false arrest. Centerville Police hired him less than a month later. Personnel records there show he has not faced any internal affairs investigations at his new department. The Centerville Police Department is relatively small. A recent roster lists 21 officers to protect the city. At one point, the 3 officers made up more than 10% of the force, and they all had documented workplace discipline warning lights on their records before the department hired them. But Centerville Police Chief Chuck Haddon wouldn't talk about it.
Why were they hired?
We're not going to discuss personnel matters.
You don't want to elaborate on that at all?
No.
He wouldn't talk about the reprimands some of them received while in his department either.
All those officers went on to be reprimanded again here at Centerville, who had a history of IA troubles at past departments. Were those foreseeable problems?
I'm not talking about personnel matters.
Haddon did say all his applicants are thoroughly vetted and all the officers he's hired were in good standing with Post.
Speaking generally, police officers get fired every day. Just like newscasters, reporters, EIO. People make mistakes. It's up to Post to say whether or not that person is still able to be a police officer. That is the basis that we go off of.
Captain Billy Boney, who sat in on our interview but wasn't mic'd up, summarized things like this.
We're going to have the most qualified, best officers that we can find. If they've had a glitch in their career, after we look at them and talk to them, we may say, well, let's give you a chance. We We've done that a couple of times. A couple times it works, a couple times it don't.
When we asked him if he has full confidence in all of his officers, Chief Haddon said yes. When reached by phone, Kenny Bibaloni declined to comment for this story. Christopher Wilcox, when we talked to him, said his issues at Fort Valley Police happened years ago, and he pointed to the Medal of Valor he was recently awarded while working for Centerville. He didn't add anything else, saying he wasn't supposed to talk to the press without a supervisor's permission. For 13 Investigates, I'm Zach Merchant.